So here on the podcast, we talk a lot about food, of course. It's one of my favorite topics, and we cover everything from the industrial food systems to how to grow food, to how to cook it, to how to source the best ingredients. I mean, we talk about food a lot. But I think one area in this topic of food that perhaps I have neglected, and I think maybe the homestead space in general has neglected, is how to take our food knowledge and what we know about nutrition and soil health and good ingredients to the next level. Because even if you have the cleanest food supply possible, in order to fuel our bodies with that good food in the best way we can, we have to take into consideration what our body actually needs. Now, that's way easier said than done because it's definitely a moving target, and it depends on you and your unique genetics and your stage of life and even the seasons of nature, which is one of my favorite parts of this conversation that we're going to get into. So I have an incredible expert joining me today. I'm joined by Johnna Sutton. She is a functional medicine certified health coach, and she has a really awesome background in sustainable agriculture, nutrition, exercise, physiology, and law. So I was just reading through her bio, and I'm like, she is a jack of all trades. I know she brings so much to the table, and she has a deep-rooted passion for connecting where our food comes from and how it also impacts us and our health. So welcome, Johnna. I am so pumped for this conversation.
So am I. Thank you so much for having me. I feel like a mega fan. I've listened to all your podcasts, and I'm just excited to be invited to speak to this community about, this little bit of missing piece that now I spend my days educating folks on.
Yes. And that's really what got my attention, because I get a lot of pitches for people coming on the show. And honestly, a lot of them I just don't pursue. But yours made me want to pursue because you said this. You said homesteaders understand soil health and nutrient density of plants and animals, but they aren't paying as much attention to the nutritional foundation for themselves, like protein, what they need for their age and activity level, fiber, the changes that we might experience during seasonal and local eating. And this is the part that I love the most. You said we're circling the concept, but not connecting the dots. And I was like, absolutely, we need to have a conversation.
Oh, I'm so impressed with myself that I wrote that.
It was so good. I was like, she could write a book. Like this is just off the cuff email. I'm like, she's good.
Well, No, I've actually never been on a podcast. I've never even reached out to anybody to be on a podcast. It's just, this is something that's been niggling at me for a while. And I'm like, I think Jill's the person. I think because you've had some, and actually other homesteading podcasts as well have had folks on talking about skin health, talking about how do I kick a sugar habit, talking about do I really need fiber or the GAPS diet. And all those concepts are relevant, but it's really hard to apply those things when you don't have like a basic foundation of where to put that information. So then you're just like, right. So do I have eggs for breakfast? How many? Or should I have oatmeal? Is it okay if I just soak the oatmeal? So I get these questions all the time. So yeah, I'm excited. Thank you.
Yes. And I think I came to that revelation, and maybe it's this journey we all have to go on as we break free from the industrial food complex. But, initially it's like, get rid of the toxins, get rid of the negative ingredients. And then we have the good ingredients. But then I realized a couple years ago, I'm like, my pantry's pretty clean. I'm cooking from scratch, but I still like my body composition and my health is maybe still not where I want it to be, even though I'm eating clean. And I was like, what the heck? I thought if I just got rid of all the seed oils and the bad sugars, that it would just naturally put me in balance. And that's not necessarily the case. So I think there is a really big missing piece here.
Yeah, for sure.
Go ahead.
No, I'm done. You go.
Give us some background of how you became interested in this, because like I was stating in the intro, like you have such a unique tapestry of your past experiences. And I'm curious how you got interested in this topic.
Yeah. So I'm a recovering lawyer. So pardon me in advance if I'm a little verbose. I'm going to try to make this as short-lived as possible. But I grew up in the Central Valley of California on a cattle ranch. It was not our cattle ranch. We lived there as renters. But for anybody that doesn't know that geography, that is agriculture of America, right? So 98% of the nuts in America come from that area. So big ag area. I went to an agriculture academy for high school. So FFA, got a scholarship to UC Davis for sustainable agriculture in the 90s. So this was kind of before regenerative agriculture, and it was really the hot topic in ag at that time. So I went to UC Davis and I did the soil ecology. Actually, my specialization was rangeland ecology. So literally pasture rotation, building soil health. I had to take crop ecology, the USDA slaughter lab, all of this stuff. But I knew I did not want to stay in that geographical region. And I'd always really been interested in human nutrition. So I thought, if I leave, I need to do something else. So I started taking classes in human nutrition and exercise physiology, thinking this will be like an option for when I leave if I don't become a farm advisor, which is what I wanted to do. But it became clear very quickly that there's this huge disconnect, even, between, okay, so we're building this soil so we have healthy soil microbes so that the plants are healthy, and then we're figuring out how to feed a species appropriate diet to livestock. And then I'd go over to human nutrition side and we're learning the food guide pyramid, where it's like 12 servings of bread a day. And even then, this is like 1996, right? Not to age myself, but I was like, that seems funny. So, I got an internship making nutrition plans at a gym. And even then it was like, here's the nutrition software. This person can have 7 tortilla chips and 5 blueberries, whatever. So I tried to eat that way and felt absolutely horrible, just kind of these cycles of binge eating, which is so typical. And then we blame ourselves. And it was actually, in retrospect, I just wasn't getting. So flash forward, at that time, it was really like I was going to be a farm advisor or a dietitian in a hospital. I didn't want to do either of those things. So I said, I'm going to go to law school, as one does.
Yeah, makes sense.
Right.
Yeah, totally.
So I did teach middle school science for a while and then ended up in Montana and did criminal defense. So trial lawyering for 15 years. And during that process, it was really apparent to me that there was, this population of folks that I was dealing with who were in and out of the criminal justice system, had a ton of mental health issues, addiction issues, but it wasn't coming from some place of like bad moral character. It was, they had a lot of functional issues, right? Physiological and psychological. And ironically, during that time, having a super stressful job and, we're living in Montana, I started having children and I got very sick, which is always the way I think a lot of people get into functional medicine is, you're getting these signals from your body. Hey, Johnna, something's not right. You're getting chronic migraines. Oh, you're 20 whatever and have to get a colonoscopy because you're having such bad gut issues and cystic acne, joint aches and pains. And then my hair fell out. And for a woman, when their hair falls out, it's like, hold the phone. There's a problem. I have to fix it. So that was about 9 years ago now. And that was the beginning where I thought I need to go back to this whole nutrition space. But not the conventional nutrition space and not naturopathy, but really biochemistry, cell biology. What is happening in the cell? How does our animal body work? So I got a master's in clinical nutrition, and now I work with Montana Functional Health as their functional nutritionist. Long story, but that is how I got here.
I love it. And it's funny how life takes us on these paths and we're like, this is right. It just took me a while to get here. Everything stacks on top of each other.
It's definitely a windy road.
Yes, absolutely. So when we were talking before we hit record, you mentioned foundations and that's kind of where we build upon everything else. And I think that like so many homesteaders have skipped to the later on and we're missing that foundation. So I guess pretend like the audience. I mean, this is a very large audience, so it's going to be a little different than what you do one-to-one, but pretend like they're a client of yours. And how can we start to understand what our bodies need on these macronutrient levels? Because, and I had this perception, just because I have sourdough bread and farm fresh eggs and grass-fed beef doesn't mean I should just eat it in massive proportions or just, go crazy. I still have to understand what my body needs and why. So how do we start to understand that? Okay,
great. So when I start working with folks, and it's a wide variety of people from 16-year-olds to 80-year-olds. They've come to functional medicine usually because there's something that is going on with their body that conventional medicine hasn't been able to address. So when people come in, they usually have, done a lot of work already. They need to eat fruits and vegetables. They get, more or less the sourcing piece. But when they come in, I invite them to think about this process as being in a healing season, right? So they are in a season where they're healing. So a lot of the protocols and the different supplements and the testing, that is like a short-term thing. And it won't always be that way because that's just trying to get back to homeostasis, so to speak. So I say that, and I say the providers, so the doctors, I work with an MD and 2 nurse practitioners and another dietitian. They're going to be throwing this at you and that at you, and these supplements and medications and whatever are going to come and go. But my job is to educate on the nutrition and the circadian piece. So we're going to start with nutrition and just the foundation so that when those pieces are moving around and coming and going, you always have a place to come back to. Okay. So we start with some definitions and we start real broad and then we get a little more narrow. So first of all, when we say nutrition, we're really talking about nutrients, right? And what is a nutrient? A nutrient is something that it's literally a foreign object that we're putting into our body, and then it's turning into our cells, right? It's turning into our body. And so there's different groups. There's macronutrients, which means we need a lot of it. So there's protein, carbohydrates, and fats. And then there's micronutrients. And these are the vitamins and minerals and also polyphenols and a lot of things that, quite frankly, haven't really been discovered. But they're the reason why there's a variety in different grasses and there's a variety of different foods and different compounds. So I start big with people with the macronutrients because if you get that part right, the micronutrients more or less will fall into place, okay? So we start with, usually I try to meet with people in person because I'm a very visual learner. So I'm a visual teacher. So I have a whiteboard and I break the food into 2 groups. Over here is going to be nutrients, right? And then over here is going to be fuels. So let's kind of dog-ear fuels for a minute and start with nutrients. So when I say nutrients in this context, I'm really referring to essential nutrients. And essential for animals, and we're an animal, means we have to eat it. Our body's not going to make it. So those essential nutrients actually is what controls satiety, not fullness. Fullness is when your stomach stretches out and you get that GLP-1 release. Hey, you're full now, but you still want something else. That's because you haven't achieved satiety. And satiety is achieved when you get these essential nutrients in. They are essential amino acids from protein, essential fatty acids from fish, also a protein, and minerals, right? And minerals you can get from plants and animals, but so when I say minerals, I mean like calcium, zinc, copper, iron, and also the electrolytes. So magnesium, potassium, sodium, and they come in their most bioavailable form from protein. So that is why the nutrient side of the equation is really the protein side of the equation. So if you get this piece right, then the fuel side will usually fall into place where it should fall into place naturally because you're getting the essential nutrients. And so that's triggering that that satiety mechanism in your brain. Okay. With me so far?
Yes. Making sense. And the satiety is such a huge thing. And I talked about it when I had the interview with the sugar coach last season. And it was like, that's been such a revelation to me. So yeah, I want to keep talking about it, but go to your next step.
Yes. And usually when I say, so then I will say, okay, so that's why we start with protein, right? Not all protein is created equal. It's broken into 2 main groups based on whether or not they have all of those essential amino acids in a serving. So complete proteins do, incomplete proteins don't. Sometimes you'll hear complete proteins referred to as like biological or bioavailable proteins. And they're mostly, I'm kind of generalizing here, but it's mostly from animals. And that's because we're an animal, the complete.
Complete,
complete.
Yes. Yeah.
Complete or biological. And that is because one serving would have all of those essential amino acids, and the minerals and vitamins that you get are in the form that we animals can use them in. So we're an animal. So if we eat animals parts, their meat, their broth from their bones, their eggs, their dairy, their organs, every nutrient is in the form we need them in because it's meant to grow animals, right?
Yep.
So incomplete proteins are from plants. So legumes like peanuts, cashews, beans, lentils, grains, soy, nuts, and seeds. Now, there is a caveat here. Soy can also be a complete protein, but it needs to be prepared in a certain way for us to be able to absorb that.
Yep.
And so that's why I put a little asterisk there for people. And if you notice, the incomplete side of the proteins are all plant proteins, and they are all the seeds of plants. And the seeds of plants are like that plant's little embryo, and they don't want to be eaten.
Yes.
And so they have these protective compounds that trigger our immune system, which makes inflammation. And it also blocks our absorption of the minerals, right?
Yep.
So if you're trying to get your zinc needs met from eating corn, that corn needs to be soaked in lime and fermented and made into masa in order to be able to absorb any of the zinc from the beef that you're eating in that corn tortilla, right?
Yes.
Additionally, when people have a lot of chronic inflammation, so medical terminology here, that anything ending in an itis is inflammation.
Yes.
So dermatitis, allergies, asthma, even anxiety, depression, there's an inflammatory piece there. And when that's gone on too long, it turns into an autoimmune condition. And we treat that nutritionally by doing an autoimmune protocol where you eliminate all of those incomplete proteins because they are all triggering the immune system. So now we're right back to animal proteins.
Yes.
Okay. So you eat your animal protein, whether it's salmon or chicken or steak or eggs or whatever. And it gets broken down into these amino acids. And those amino acids build every single tissue in your body. And whatever is left over is stored in your muscle, right? This is super, super important because people will often get worried if I'm increasing my protein, I'm going to gain weight. And I'm like, well, hopefully you are going to gain muscle because you're not losing it, right? And that muscle is super important as a storage place for protein, for those amino acids. So how do you figure out how much protein you need? So get out your pencil and paper.
Yes.
I'm going to tell you the cheat sheet.
Okay.
And then I promise we'll get to fuels. But it's all driven from this protein. So if you think about the fact that these amino acids build every tissue in your body, the amount of protein you need is going to depend on how much tissue you have. So the taller you are, and even for men, they need a little bit more just because of bigger tissue. And the older you are, the more protein you need. And when we get to seasonality, like your seasons of life, that's going to change too. But for just the basic calculation, there's a couple ways to do this. There's the subjective way and the objective way. The objective way is for women, your first 5 feet of height is 100 grams of protein. And then 5 grams of protein for every inch after that. So I'm 5'3".
Yeah.
So that's 100 grams of protein. 3 times 5 is 15. So that's 115 grams of protein. Complete protein. Okay?
Yeah.
Complete protein. Not the beans and legumes. And it's not that those things are bad, but just to backtrack, one serving, like 1 cup, like of the ground beef is like 30 to 50 grams of protein. To get that, from beans, you need 4 cups.
Yes.
So we don't want to do that.
That's a lot of beans.
Right?
That's a lot of beans. Yeah.
So that would be kind of a good amount of protein for somebody at my height. That's the objective way. For men, all you do is start with 110 grams for that first 5 feet versus 100, right?
Okay.
Now, right? So that's the objective way. The subjective way is 1 gram of protein per pound of ideal body weight. And this is why it's hard. So if you are 300 pounds and you want to be 180 pounds, then you would want to eat 180 grams of protein per day, right?
See. Okay, sure.
Right? If you are actively trying to change your body composition by losing fat, you are going to kind of boost up your protein. So maybe I want to be 130 pounds. I would eat 130 grams of protein.
Okay.
And this is just the basic calculation, right? It's going to vary. So once you get that down, and let me just one more thing on the calculation. The recommended daily allowance for protein in America was set in the 1930s. It is 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight, which is very, very low. That's probably around 50 or 60 grams of protein per day.
Oh.
And most Americans are not even eating that. Even people that come to me and say they're eating a high protein diet, they're not. And
that's still the standard set in the 30s is still what's being recommended. That has not been updated. That's fascinating. And I just caveat, if you think about a lot of the recommended daily allowances, the food guide pyramid, were put in place because of what was happening socially at the time. Yes.
And at that time, we were coming out of the Depression and going into World War II. And our young men, and women too, but the young men that were going to fight they were malnourished. And so the government did, these studies to figure out what's the least amount of protein that we can feed these soldiers so that they don't die or develop a disease. And that is still what the RDA is for protein. And I mean, not to get a little tinfoil hatty, but if you flash forward to the 1970s, when we started really pushing the processed food, there was a food scientist who discovered the bliss point. I think they talk about it in that book, Salt, Sugar, Fat.
Yes, that was so fascinating. Oh my gosh.
So if you keep the protein amount in processed food, if you keep it low, right at about that 12% of calories, which is what the current RDA is. If you keep it low like that, and then you just fill the food with carbs and fat, you will trigger a bliss point in the human brain that will want them to keep eating that, because carbs and fat do not occur in nature. So our brain is like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. I'm going to eat all of it. And you're not achieving that satiety because there's not enough protein in that food to achieve the satiety. So that's why you could eat a whole box of mac and cheese. But if you tried to eat that amount of calories in steak, you wouldn't be able to do it, or it'd be really hard.
Yes.
So that's why that protein level is still low, I think.
Right. Yeah. And we have all the grains and all the subsidies and all of that to where that's what's driving those recommendations. Yeah, there's so much more to it than what meets
when I tell people this, or, when I do like a speech to a big room of people or whatever, they are like, this seems really high. Are you sure this is correct? Yes, because now we have done protein studies on amino acids, which weren't known in the 30s.
Right.
And we now know about this protein leverage hypothesis and satiety and essential amino acids. They didn't know that then.
Right.
We do now.
Yes.
So I don't know that that's ever going to change. But so just when your aunt or your grandma is like, that's too much protein. Like, no, it's not. And I will say one more thing. Protein is a self-limiting macronutrient. You are not going to overdo it because you will get very full. So every single time people come back, they're like, I can't eat this amount of protein. I cannot eat 100 grams of protein. It's not possible. I'm like, it is possible. You're filling up with other stuff. Yeah. So anyway, the other stuff is fuel. Okay. So we got our protein. Let's say our optimal protein amount for me, we'll just use me as an example, 130 grams, right? Because that's roughly what I aim for. So then you come over to the fuel side. And humans are, and all animals are hybrid machines. We can run on fat. We can run on carbs. And by definition, carbohydrates are anything from a plant, anything that takes sun and turns it into carbon. That is what a carbohydrate is. The only animal food that has a carbohydrate is the lactose in dairy. The lactose is the carbohydrate part of milk, right? Mm-hmm. So when I say carbohydrate, I mean everything from a plant, parsley, carrots, bagels, and lactose, right? That's a carbohydrate. And then there's fat, which seems a little more self-explanatory, right? Okay.
Yeah, right.
So the way the human body is designed to work, and when we talk about metabolic health or metabolic flexibility, is that we should be able to toggle between both of those fuel sources. So when we are born and we are breastfeeding, we are primarily using fat as fuel. And that fat is getting broken down into ketones. And those ketones are going into the mitochondria of the cell, which is the part of the cell that turns our fuel into energy, right? And then that's fine. That's also what happens during times of famine, during winter in northern climates. Like people would be in ketosis, right? That's what that is. Then when you start eating a food that is a carbohydrate, or you're exercising, or you're out in the light in the middle of the day, you will actually either break down that carbohydrate into glucose, or you'll make your own glucose from your own tissue, which is why there's no essential carbohydrate. There's essential protein, essential fat, no essential carbohydrate, right?
Okay.
So let's say your first food is a sweet potato. And so then now that baby is breaking down that carbohydrate into glucose. And that glucose is now going into the mitochondria of the cell and making energy. And then when baby is not eating, or person is not eating, you're supposed to switch back to this fat burning mode, right? Okay. And break down either our own fat into ketones, but we should be able to toggle between the both. So those are the fuels. And if you eat more fuel than your body needs, we have this amazing mechanism to store it, right? So we make these ketones, we make these glucose, goes into the cell, makes energy. Whatever's not used as energy is stored as body fat and or triglycerides in the blood. So when you get your cholesterol panel done and it says your triglycerides are high, it's usually not because you're eating too much fat. It's usually because you're eating too many fuels. And most of our primary fuels are carbohydrates in this, right? And then when those cells all get too full, you can also store a little bit of fat in your liver, which is what non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is, right?
Yes.
So to have a healthy metabolism, what we're really saying is that mitochondria in our cell is able to use ketones and glucose as fuel and store what needs to be stored. And that we, as an animal, we can go between using fat as fuel, like when we're sleeping, or maybe you went 6 hours without eating because you're doing something or whatever, and you can break down your own fat and use it as fuel. Versus then we eat a meal and now we're breaking down glucose and using that. We should be able to go between both. Most Americans, I think the recent estimates are some upwards of 90% of American adults cannot do that. They are what is called insulin resistant. Right? So let's say you wake up and you have a bowl of oatmeal, right? That is just a carbohydrate and it's going to get broken into glucose. And, so that's all you eat is that oatmeal. And that glucose is going to get stored. Used a little bit as fuel and then store some as fat, right? When that glucose hits the bloodstream, you only want a little tiny bit, like 16 calories worth staying in your bloodstream, because more than that's going to damage the blood vessels, right? And then your liver has to make cholesterol and come patch it all up. That's what hardening of the arteries is, right? We don't want that.
Okay.
Right?
Yes, right.
Yes. So what happens is insulin comes, this hormone, this growth hormone called insulin, and takes that glucose and puts it to be a little stored in the muscle, a little to be used as fuel, and the rest stored as fat. When you are you're constantly eating carbohydrates, and you're constantly getting your bloodstream filled with glucose, insulin keeps having to come on. Over time, and or if the mitochondria of the cell gets damaged, then the insulin isn't able to do its job very efficiently, and insulin rises in the blood, right? And
Yes.
so now it's like our body forgot how to use fat.
Yep.
So insulin resistance then would lead to prediabetes and then diabetes, which is why now the rates of those diseases is like astronomically high, even in children.
Yes.
Because it happens years before. So back to our foundation. So if you've got your protein, which is 130 grams per day, and then you look at your fuels and you decide, I want my primary fuel to be carbohydrates right now because I don't want to do a ketogenic diet and there's not a famine. Right?
Yeah, sure.
So I got my 130 grams of protein and then my primary fuel is carbohydrates. So that carbohydrate level should be 130 grams per day or less, right?
Okay.
So you would never want your fuels to be higher than your nutrients, right?
Okay,
so
right.
130 protein, 130 or less of carbohydrate, and then your fat, which is your other fuel, is going to be a little bit less than your primary fuel. And I like to set a bottom on that rather than a ceiling of at least 85 grams per day, especially for women, in order to make hormones, but men too.
Yes.
Because 9 times out of 10, when people come in, their protein is too low. It's about 60, sometimes even lower. Their carbs are about 300, and their fat is like 20. So it's all out of balance. And then we're told, eat this balanced diet. And it's like, I don't know what that means. Okay. So protein 130, carbs 130 or less, fat at least 85 grams. And then you need to break that down by meal, right? So starting with just breakfast, if you have, let's say, 40 grams of protein for breakfast, and there's a lot of resources out there to help you figure out how much protein is in certain foods. The one I use the most is Chronometer.
Yes, I've seen that one.
Yeah, I think that's the most accurate. But to put it in perspective, if you have a cup of ground pork, that's probably 40 grams of protein, like one measuring cup. One egg is 6.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to get your protein needs met with just eggs, you should pair your eggs with another kind of protein.
That makes me so sad because, like, I think so many women do this. I thought eggs were protein, so I'm like, I'm having eggs for breakfast, and then I'm like, why am I hungry at 10 o'clock? And they're not protein
all the time. They'll be like,
it's so annoying.
I'm eating a protein breakfast.
Yeah.
Well, eggs are wonderful and they are a good source of protein, but you have to eat 5 of them to even hit that 30 gram threshold. You should not be eating less than 30 grams of protein at a meal.
Yeah.
Like pretty much ever. Like never. Right? And so then if you take that at that meal, let's say you eat 40 grams of protein, your carbs should be 40 or less. Okay. Well, an apple has 40 grams of carbohydrates.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So like we were all told, just pair your apple with some peanut butter. It's like, well, that's great, but you've got 40 grams of carbs and 2 grams of protein. And not only is that not helpful from a satiety perspective, it's going to jack your blood sugar.
Yes.
And then your blood sugar is going to crash a couple hours later and you're going to be hungry again. And you're having difficulty focusing.
Been there.
All the things.
Yeah.
Yes. So you want to think about protein, primary fuel, sufficient fat. Of that primary fuel, carbohydrates, it should be less than your protein intake at every meal, or at least equal. And of that carbohydrate, you want to have a certain amount of fiber, that varies by season. But the magic, formula is protein, fat, and fiber. If you get that down for you at your season of life, and what you're going through and what works for you, it's like magic.
Yes. And I can attest, and I've said, thank you for that. That was fantastic. I can attest, and I've alluded to this on a few previous episodes, but like I've been kind of not even going crazy on it, just like thinking more about protein the last year, and I cannot believe the difference. And part of me like wanted to push back against it because it's trendy right now, at least on social media. I'm seeing like everybody talk about protein, and I hate doing trendy things. So I'm like, surely not. But like once I started playing with it, it just changes everything. Like the food cravings go away, the sugar cravings go away. My weight is where I would prefer it. The muscles going on easier. It's just like, why did we take so long for our culture to start paying attention to the protein? I mean, I kind of know why. It has to do with subsidies and the food pyramid, all those things. But it's like, holy cow, we missed this for a really long time.
A really long time. It's the one thing that, cravings. I mean, I think I just want to touch on cravings for a minute because I start out by asking people what they crave. Mm-hmm. Because there's a reason you're craving something. And it's not because you're weak-willed or whatever. It's because your body's trying to tell you it needs something.
Yeah.
So if you're craving, and I get this a lot from women, bread and cheese, bread and cheese. I'm like, you're not getting enough protein.
Yep.
Because your brain is trying to get you to eat stuff. And there's these Australian researchers, Robbenheimer and Simpson, they are the ones that did all these protein leverage studies on the amino acids. And they did the studies on crickets and mice and monkeys and dogs and people and found that if you lower the protein level in the food, you will overeat fuel every single time.
Amen.
It is pure physiology. It has nothing to do with, maybe not nothing to do with, but it's not like a willpower thing. It's really not.
Yeah.
So if you're craving sugar, it's probably because you're not getting enough essential fatty acids, which come from seafood and fish and algae, right?
Yep.
And if you're in Montana or Wyoming, there's not a whole lot of that swimming around.
There is not, sadly.
A lot of
deficiency of seafood here in Wyoming.
Yeah. So that's something we'll work on. I mean, yes, it can be related to the gut and everything else as well, but that's kind of secondary. Once you kind of so we'll send people away with like, okay, go away for 2 weeks to a month and use Chronometer for at least a couple of those days to kind of figure out how much protein you're getting and then look at each meal and see how they're balanced and then come back. And when they come back every single time, people will say either A, I can't eat that much protein, or just like you said, Jill, wow, like I don't want donuts anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just like it's a non-issue. And it's funny because like, I'll eat potato chips, but that's not like my food. It's not like my favorite thing. I can eat, and I don't like to eat at night generally, but whenever there'll be times where I like 8 o'clock and I want potato chips and it's like insatiable. And I'm like, why am I like, what's going on? And if I think back to that day, it's a day where I did not eat enough protein. I didn't have a very good lunch. I had a carby lunch or a carby breakfast but like clockwork. And it's like, it's like this craving you cannot ignore. And then you go eat the potato chips and they're not satisfying. So then you go rummage for other things. And it's just like that vicious cycle. But yeah, but as long as I have the protein lunch, dinner, whatever, like it doesn't even cross my mind. It's just insane. The body's trying to tell us stuff. Yeah.
It is trying to tell us something. And this is going back to like animal agriculture. Like we do this for our animals. Like you can even see it we have goats, right? They're wandering around and they're like, I'm going to eat some bark and now I'm going to eat this leaf and now I'm going to eat this ash from the burned down fire. They are doing exactly what our brains do as animals too. It's just, we are like the only species, if we dropped us off in the forest, we're like, I don't know, should I dig for tubers or should I kill a squirrel? I don't know. Like,
Yep.
So you have to listen to those signals. A lot of doctors call them symptoms. I don't like that word. To me, they're signals. Your body's trying to tell you something, So try to figure out what it is. That's what our job is.
Yes. Amen. Hey, friends. So I'm interrupting this episode for just a second to share something pretty cool with you. So I'll never forget the time many years ago when we visited a naturopathic doctor to talk about my husband Christian's allergies. He's dealt with them since he was a kid, and he's kind of just one of those people who tends to be allergic to pretty much everything. And the doctor's recommendations was to put in a air filtration system in our house, to stop working in dusty barns or outbuildings, and to stop being around animals. And I walked away super frustrated because obviously, if you know us, that's just not an option. We're going to have the animals. We're going to have the barns. We're not going to go live in a sterile house somewhere in a big city. So I kind of ignored those recommendations. But over the years since then, I've heard a lot of other naturopathic doctors and people in that space talk about the importance of having some sort of air filtration in your home. I just didn't really know how to do that. And I didn't like the thoughts of putting in a ginormous system that sounded really complicated and super expensive. So I was really excited to come across Air Doctor. Air Doctor is a air filtration system that captures all of those super tiny contaminants that you can't see. Think things like dust, pollen, mold spores, pet dander, bacteria, viruses, and even things like ozone, gases, and VOCs. It's this little unit. You don't have to hire an HVAC company to put it in. You just take it out of the box, plug it in, and off you go. And it has this thing called an ultra HEPA filter that is proven to filter particles that are 100 times smaller than a typical HEPA filter. So it's kind of like a HEPA on steroids. So we have ours in our bedroom because we spend more time there than any other room in the house, while we're sleeping, of course. And I love knowing that at least for that period of time, especially during these summer months, our body is getting a break from the constant pollens and histamines and everything else that's floating around outside. And quite honestly, is making us a little bit miserable, itchy eyes, runny nose, the whole 9 yards. So I'm excited for you to give it a try if this is something you've been struggling with as well. Air Doctor comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee, so if you don't love it, you just send it back for a refund minus shipping. And I have a promo code for you. If you use the code HOMESTEAD, you can save up to $300 on your Air Doctor system. So head on over to airdoctorpro.com. That's AIRDOCTORPRO, airdoctorpro.com, and use the promo code HOMESTEAD to give it a try. Now, back to our episode. So I've been playing a lot with macros the last, year and a half. And I've done the apps and I have Chronometer and I've done some different programs. One thing that continually frustrates me when I'm trying to get specific with macros is I feel like so many of the programs or apps are built for someone who has no family and they live in New York and they just eat chicken breast and broccoli all day. And then when you do that, it's really easy to count your macros. But I like to cook. I'm constantly recipe testing for projects in my restaurant. And I like making meals with more than one component. So I want to make a soup. I want to make a skillet meal. And it's so hard to figure macros for those from scratch foods. Do you have any tips on how to do that? Because single ingredient meals are fine sometimes, roast, potato, broccoli. But there's a lot of times we're putting things together. Yeah.
So 2 things. I hear this all the time. And I cook from scratch everything too, mixed meals. So number 1 is you can on Chronometer put a recipe in, right? You can make a recipe and put it in. And I've done that a few times. To be honest though, then you have to kind of guess how many carbs and proteins and fats would be in there. And that leads to my second point. You're probably just going to have to guess.
Okay.
And you're just going to have to estimate. And this is why I try to prioritize things for people. Protein, fats, and fibers. Fiber is a part of carbohydrates, right? That's kind of the most important thing. And what your goal is matters most. So if you're working on trying to get protein, just worry about the protein. I'm pretty sure I had about a cup of ground beef. More or less. In the soup picture, I had a bowl of soup. There was some potatoes, but there was a lot of ground beef. So just kind of go there. And that's what I do. Yesterday I had turkey soup, right? Because Thanksgiving.
That's turkey.
So I'm more or less, I probably had a cup of turkey bone broth. I probably had a quarter of a carrot and maybe a half a cup of shredded turkey. And I just estimate. Okay. But for me, my goal right now is getting that protein piece right. When I'm working with people on getting their carb levels lowered and their fiber levels up, we usually do that after we get the protein piece down. And then we kind of just work on that. So kind of segmenting it so that you're not trying to do everything at once.
Yes. That makes me feel better because every time I've tried a program, I just get so frustrated because I'm like, I'm sure everyone, we compare. I'm sure everyone else is counting it perfectly, and I'm just making these weird soups and skillet things, and I'm just guessing. So I always it feels defeating, and so it helps to know that focus on the protein and then don't. Because I've done the weighing, and I think the weighing was helpful for me just to visualize how much I was eating, because I'm like, I was definitely underestimating the carbs I was eating, and definitely overestimating the protein. But then I don't want to weigh for the rest of my life. Like, I'm just not interested in that lifestyle, nor is it conducive to how we do things. So
no. Yeah. And to your point, it's a great tool in the beginning, just like tracking is a great tool in the beginning. You don't want to do those things your whole life because I think it can become a little orthorexic.
I agree. And
it's also why I get out the measuring cups. I literally bring them to the clinic. I'm like, sometimes just visual, and then on Chronometer, you can use the drop down menu to change it to a cup or teaspoon versus ounces, right? So that can help too.
Okay. That's helpful. Thank you for making me feel better on that.
Everybody says that, myself included. I'm like, I don't know. I had turkey soup.
Exactly. And I see that, you see the reels on Instagram where they're weighing and they're like, and they're going crazy. And I'm like, I just don't want to do it that much. I'm just not that interested. I'm interested, but not that interested. So.
I'm a nutritionist and I don't do that.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, sure.
I did it like 10 years ago.
Yeah. I think it's useful at the beginning.
Or if you're in a season of healing, right, where we are really working on a specific goal to address a specific issue, then we might come back and do some weighing and measuring and stuff.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Thank you. That was helpful. Now, we're running. This went really fast, but I have a few more questions for you before we land the plane.
It's fine.
So
I got lots of information.
I know you do. You're like, we're going to have to do this again. I feel like we're going to have part 2 because this is so good. So we have this information. I am so fascinated by how nature and seasons affect what we need to be eating and what our body needs. Can you break that down for us? Yes.
So, oh my goodness. And this is the part where homesteaders have a total leg up. So first of all, there are seasons of life, which maybe we can get to that next. But because we're at a transition phase of seasons right now, I think it's really important to talk about it right now. At least here in northern climates, in the summertime, I don't know if it's like this in Wyoming, but here in Montana, we almost get a little bit manic in the summertime because the days are so long. Yes. You're up at 5 a.m. You want to get everything done. You're squeezing everything into these 3 months, all the recreation, all the travel, all the farming, all the everything. And you're just wiped out by mid-July or mid-August. And that is natural. That is normal. We are optimizing that time. But because we're super active and we're super busy and even maybe a little more stressed, you are burning through a lot more nutrients during that time. You're burning more B vitamins, more magnesium, more vitamin C. But if you think about where those micronutrients come from, they come from, liver actually has all of the nutrients that we need, period. But they also come from a lot of produce, right? Well, what is growing in the summertime? Lots of produce, and we're very active. There's a lot of bright sun and UV light, so we are more insulin sensitive, meaning we can actually eat more carbohydrates in the summer and early fall because there's more light, and that is how our bodies evolve, right? So if you're eating locally and seasonally, and you're looking at what is growing where I live this time of year, and you're eating those things, you can eat the melons and the cherries and the whatever that is coming in the summer. And in the fall, is when you're harvesting your apples and your pears. Of course, I'm speaking to northern climates because I live in a northern climate.
Same. Yep.
Yeah, I think there's less variability like at the equator, but even growing up in the Central Valley of California, there's still seasonal variability. Like asparagus is a spring thing. Yep. Right? It's not year round.
Yep.
And those foods have specific nutrients that we would need at that specific time of year, right? So in the fall, traditionally, we're harvesting tubers and squashes and apples and pears and elderberries, right? All of these things. Yes. And so you're kind of loading the hump a little bit. That's when we would put on fat traditionally, all this feasting times, like post-harvest, right? And that's fine. We would get fat. Great. Because now we're going to go into the winter where nothing's growing for like 3 or 4 months. And you're basically eating fat and fish and meat and maybe some cellar stable items, some sauerkraut, potatoes, onions. But you're not really eating asparagus and, avocados and cucumbers and stuff in January in a northern climate, right? So you would be kind of in ketosis. So when I work with people and they are like needing to do a ketogenic diet, maybe to reverse insulin resistance or because they have PCOS, which is really insulin resistance, or diabetes or cognitive issues, whatever it is, I'm like, let's try to time it in the winter because that would be a natural time. Plus the days are shorter. So you're supposed to be sleeping more. You're not supposed to be up at 5 a.m. I mean, I get if you have cows or there's certain things in your job, you have to. But generally speaking, you're supposed to go to bed at like 7 or 8. So you're sleeping more. You're out making hay. Not at all. You're supposed to be doing that less. So it's an easier time traditionally to not need a whole bunch of fuel sources like carbohydrates. And you can instead, so the way that would look with a macronutrient level is like your protein stays the same, and then your carbs would just come way down and your fats would go way up. So if you're eating 130 grams of protein a day, you're eating 130 grams of fat a day, and your carbohydrates are really low. So from a seasonal perspective, it would make sense to do that in the winter time. And then spring comes and you're getting that watercress and you're getting dandelion greens and you're getting all greens and so on. Does that answer that?
It does. It makes so much sense. And just like, I don't know, every time I hear little pieces of that, it just makes me so happy. I'm like, it just is logical. I don't know why, why we fight it. I mean, I know I don't do it perfectly, but I felt that so much as I've gotten older. I used to hate winter. Winter used to drive me crazy. I dreaded it. And now I love it. And I just sink into it. And I wish more people understood, we're not supposed to go at summer's pace all the time. I can't go at summer's pace. Cause like you said, I'm manic. I'm like crazy psycho, 24/7 in the summer. Yeah. And by end of August, I'm like, please, I need the dark. I need the early bedtimes. I need the candles. And I think we just need to start tapping into our bodies. They're telling us that they want that rhythm. We just got to listen to it.
Exactly. Just like with the food. And I think we tend to override that in this culture a lot. And I think just briefly on the light piece of things, that could be a whole podcast in itself. But I really, really try to work with people on that because we are diurnal animals. We evolved under the sun. So all of our hormones, cortisol, melatonin, insulin, our thyroid hormone, and all of our sex hormones, they happen when it receives a message from the hypothalamus and pituitary in the brain, which receives information through the eye, which comes from light, right?
Yes.
So in the summertime, when there's lots of light, we're going to have a different hormonal balance than we would in the wintertime. Ideally, the problem is we try to replicate that same summer schedule, wake up at 5 a.m., chug my coffee, either go to the gym under fluorescent lights and do a workout or do whatever, and then have our tropical banana smoothie, with food that's not even seasonally or locally relevant at all. And then, come January, we're burnt out and exhausted and don't understand why. And it's like, you're supposed to be sleeping.
Yeah, supposed to be sleeping. Yes.
So anyway, we have a lot of folks with, chronic fatigue syndrome, insulin resistance. There's even a relation to light with that, because if you think about, if you have a release of cortisol, which is going to happen not only in stressful situations or when you're exercising, but when you see sunlight, a portion of that sunlight is blue, right?
Yes.
But in the morning, there's none of that. In the evening, there's none of that. It's really high noon that you've got blue. When you are looking at light, like artificial light, LED bulbs, your screens on your phone or your TV or your laptop or traffic lights or whatever, it's exclusively blue. So your brain thinks that it's the middle of the day and that it should be making a lot of cortisol. And if you're not eating at that time, then it's going to send the message to break down your tissue and make glucose. Now you've got glucose in your blood, even though you never ate, and insulin has to come and take care of that. And it doesn't need it. So now you're storing fat and you're becoming more insulin resistant. And there's a ton of studies on this on shift works in particular.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Yeah, we kind of got off down a rabbit hole on that one. But
what I was thinking, would you be willing to come back on and we could do an episode on light and circadian rhythm?
Yes.
Because I feel like we could talk. I have so many more questions on that, and we're running out of time today. But I think this is so important, and I see more people talking about it. It's definitely not as obscure as it was a few years ago. But I'd love to just do a deep dive for the audience. Because again, it's like it so fits with the homestead. We're trying to be in rhythm with nature. This is just such a beautiful way we can do that. And I think that, our culture, our modern world is setting us up for failure in that so much.
It is. And I think homesteaders have an advantage because our daily rhythm of life, we already know when the sunrise comes up. Most of my clients don't unless they're homesteaders.
Yep.
But we know. You can look at your chickens and be like, oh, must be daytime. We already know what seasonal and local food is. We are already doing movement throughout the day. So we already have that. It's just a matter of putting it into a framework that is going to be usable. And now that you kind of have that foundation, then when you're going through different seasons of life, whether it's an autoimmune diagnosis or you're trying to get pregnant or you had a surgery or you have some gut issues or even your menstrual cycle, right? Which should actually go with the lunar cycle, right? All of those things, there are specific ways of eating for your menstrual cycle, which makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
But once you get that protein to fuel piece balanced, then you can adjust it for all that other stuff, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. Yes. Oh, I love it so much. I love it all. I like when all the pieces come together. It makes me so happy.
I know, it drove me nuts. That's why when I started out in my undergrad in nutrition, I was like, why are we talking about this low fat, no fat? Then it was like low carb, high carb, no carb, keto. And I was like, why is nobody talking about the part where you get all your nutrients from?
Yeah.
Like, I don't understand.
I know.
It's driving me nuts.
Yeah. Yeah. But we need people like you to see those gaps. That's where the magic happens.
Well, when we got goats and our soil is really deficient in selenium. And so, you have to give them selenium and copper. I didn't know any of it. And then I did a micronutrient panel on myself. And I was deficient in selenium and copper and all the same things that the goats were. And it was like, oh, where do I get those things?
Yeah.
Liver. Yep. And I was like, oh, like not vegetables?
Right.
Oh, seems counterintuitive, but it's accurate, actually.
Yes, absolutely. All right, I love it. Here's what I want to do, because I do have a hard stop today, which is frustrating. But I want to have you back on to have a whole light topic. We'll schedule that once we jump off. And then before we leave today, could you point people in the direction where they can connect with you more and learn more about what you offer? Because you are a wealth of information.
Oh, thanks, Jill. Okay, so my name's Johnna Sutton, and probably the easiest way to contact me is by email. So it's johnnasutton@gmail.com. So JOHNNAKSUTTON@gmail. I am active on Instagram, but I took a year and a half off, so I'm slowly getting back into that. Yeah, and that is Sutton Outdoors MT. And then I also work primarily for Montana Functional Health, which is based in Missoula, Montana. And that the website is mfhcare.com. And you can either just email me directly, if that's easiest, or reach out on Instagram, because I am now checking it once a day. I had to put a timer on my phone. Or you can contact Montana Functional Health, and they do a complimentary 20-minute phone calls with one of our founders to just figure out what somebody might need.
Okay. So people can do some remote, like if they don't live in Missoula, they could still reach out. Okay, perfect.
So we do telehealth. We have people, we've had people in Poland, Canada, all over the United States. So we do a lot of telehealth, and we have an MD and a couple nurse practitioners and a dietitian. So they do a lot of the ordering of labs and all of that kind of stuff. And then I work with people on how to implement that.
Okay.
And then how to figure out what I just told all of you. So now you won't even need to do the first session because you just had it.
I know they're going to come in and they're going to be so easy to talk to because they listen to this episode. So I love it.
Exactly.
Okay. Fabulous.
Awesome.
And we'll put that stuff in the show notes, guys. Johnna, thank you so much. This was a blast and I can't wait to do it again.
Okay. Thanks.